As a patient or an employee, what's the most insane thing you've seen or experienced in a hospital? I was stuck in Mercy General for 2 weeks after a car accident left me with a shattered pelvis and a whole lot of metal holding my bones together. The recovery was brutal, but what I witnessed in that hospital room was worse than any physical pain I went through. My roommate was this sweet old man named Frank who had to be pushing 85. He'd been there for almost a month waiting for a bed to open up at Golden Years Nursing Home across town. Frank had been living alone after his wife died, but a stroke had left him weak and unsteady on his feet. His daughter Patricia visited every day, and you could tell the whole family was stressed about the transition. Frank wasn't a difficult patient by any stretch. He was polite, never complained about the food, and always said thank you when the staff helped him. The problem was that he needed help with almost everything: getting to the bathroom, reaching his water cup, even adjusting his pillow. His hands shook constantly, and his legs barely supported his weight. The day shift nurses were generally pretty good with him, but there was this evening nurse named Brenda who had clearly decided Frank was just being lazy and manipulative. She'd roll her eyes whenever he pressed the call button and would make these passive-aggressive comments about how he needed to start doing things for himself if he wanted to get better. I tried to speak up a few times, but Brenda would just smile that fake nurse smile and tell me to focus on my own recovery. Frank never said anything to defend himself. I think he was from that generation that just accepted whatever treatment they got from authority figures. The whole situation came to a head on a Wednesday evening. Frank had been pressing his call button for about 10 minutes because he really needed to use the bathroom. I could see him getting more and more distressed, shifting around in his bed and looking toward the door hopefully every time footsteps passed by. When Brenda finally showed up, she had this exasperated look on her face before Frank even said anything. "I'm sorry to bother you," Frank said in his shaky voice, "but I really need to get to the bathroom." Brenda crossed her arms. "Frank, we've talked about this. You can't expect us to drop everything every time you don't want to use the bedpan. You need to start being more independent." "I've been trying," Frank said, and you could hear the desperation in his voice. "But I can't make it on my own. I almost fell yesterday." "That's because you're not putting in the effort. You're perfectly capable of walking to the bathroom by yourself." I watched this whole exchange feeling sick to my stomach. Frank wasn't being lazy. The man could barely stand up without assistance. But Brenda just turned around and walked out of the room, leaving Frank sitting there looking defeated. About 20 minutes later, Frank couldn't wait anymore. I watched him slowly swing his legs over the side of the bed and try to stand up. His legs were shaking so badly I could see the tremors from across the room. "Frank, maybe you should wait for help," I called over, but he was already committed to making the attempt. He took 2 wobbly steps toward the bathroom before his legs gave out completely. He went down hard, and I heard the sickening sound of his head hitting the tile floor. The impact was loud enough that I was sure other people in the hallway must have heard it. Frank lay there for a moment, not moving, and I started pressing my own call button frantically. A male nurse named Derek came running in and found Frank unconscious on the floor. Instead of checking if Frank was okay or calling for help, Derek just scooped him up and dumped him back on the bed like he was moving a sack of potatoes. Frank's head was lolling to one side, and there was a nasty bump forming on his forehead where he'd hit the floor. "Is he alright?" I asked Derek. He hit his head pretty hard. Derek barely glanced at Frank. "He's fine. Probably just got dizzy from standing up too fast." "You sent." But Frank wasn't fine. He was groggy and confused for the rest of the evening, much worse than his usual post-stroke symptoms. When Patricia arrived for her regular evening visit around 7, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "Dad seems really out of it tonight," she said to Brenda, who had come in to check Frank's vitals. "Did something happen?" Brenda didn't even hesitate. "Nothing happened. He's been sleeping most of the day. Some days are just harder than others with stroke patients." Patricia looked concerned, but seemed to accept the explanation. That's when I decided I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Excuse me," I called out to Patricia. "Could you come over here for a minute?" Patricia walked over to my bed, looking puzzled. I kept my voice low but told her everything. How Brenda had refused to help Frank get to the bathroom, how he'd fallen and hit his head, how Derek had just tossed him back in bed without checking if he was injured. Patricia's face went from confusion to anger to absolute fury in about 10 seconds. She marched back over to Brenda and demanded to know why she'd lied about what happened to her father. The next few hours were chaos. Patricia called the rest of the family, who showed up ready for war. Hospital administrators got involved. There were heated conversations in the hallway that I could hear through the door. Security cameras were reviewed, incident reports were filed, and both Brenda and Derek were suspended pending investigation. Frank got a CT scan that night that showed a mild concussion. Patricia moved him to a different hospital the next day, and I heard later that the family filed a formal complaint with the state health department. I never found out what happened to Brenda and Derek officially, but I never saw either of them again during the rest of my stay. Sometimes doing the right thing is uncomfortable, but watching that sweet old man get treated like garbage when he was at his most vulnerable was something I couldn't just ignore.